Each of these people recognize and respect the decision of their opponents who have chosen to spend their time, their energies, and their finances to create a better America for all of us. We expect them to believe themselves to be the best candidate. They have been asked to speak about themselves, who they are, where they have come from, what they have done, and if elected, what they will do. They have each agreed to talk about themselves to prove to us they deserve our vote. They have all agreed further that their responses tonight will not be built on demeaning their opponents, but by building themselves, and for that they have my deepest gratitude, each and every one of them. This evening, the community gathered here will participate in an event proving civil discourse can take place in America. And these candidates have agreed to prove it to our community, the wider county, state, and country. We don't have to agree to respect the choices of others. But America is strengthened by competition, not threatened by it. At the end of the forum, you are all invited to the Flax Social Hall to my left for coffee and the ability to meet with and speak with the candidates. We ask that you please be brief but short in your questions or comments, as many of us will want to share the same opportunity that you would be having. I offer my sincere and humble thanks to each of these 4 amazing Americans who have chosen to offer themselves, their time, their lives, their energies, to serve us. And with that, I would now like to introduce our moderator from Channel 5 TV, John Shaman.
Thank you, very much. Thank you. Great turnout tonight. You guys all understand how important it is to get out there and vote. Early voting, I believe, began today in St. Lucie and Martin County, right? I think it's at the Community Center on Oroso, or the one up on Walton, and also the Lewis Library, I believe. So you've got 3 places here in St. Lucie County. If anybody came up from Martin County, you can go to the election headquarters on Martin Luther King Boulevard in Stewart. So again, this is great because, first of all, I don't have to ask all the questions, which is fantastic. So thank you guys for being very thorough with a lot of the questions for our candidates tonight. What we're going to do for about the next hour or so, first we'd like each candidate to offer an opening statement of up to 2 minutes to let you know who they are and sort of get a broad brush on what they represent. And I'd like to start with Mr. Freeman in the corner over there. Mr. Freeman.
Well, good evening, and thank you for being great Americans and for coming out tonight. Thank you for believing in America. Thank you for who you are. I'm Mark Freeman. I've spent my life in medicine. I've also been a businessman. So very few people in the country understand the medical industry as well as I do, knowing it from the medical insurance side and from the clinical side. So I bring a lot to the table there. I've written extensively on this subject. About myself personally, I'm a straight shooter. If I tell you something, I will do it. I will say what I mean and mean what I say. I stand for honesty in government. I stand for service. I stand for service to my country. I'm a veteran, and I was a good student. That's how I got into medical school, in case you're interested. And I've been a hard worker all my life. My father gave me a strong work ethic, a strong ethic for honesty. So hopefully we'll have a great evening tonight. Thank you all for being here.
Shalom. My My name is Dave Cummings, and I'll give you a little background on myself. I was a young man. I joined the military, and I served 4 years in the infantry, 2 years U.S. Special Forces. And I used the GI Bill and working as a police officer for 5 years to get my first college degree. Later, I went on and worked in the federal government as a special investigator, got my master's degree in Homeland Security. After spending some time doing hero work, I decided to go out and try to chase the American dream that I've been protecting for so many years. So I started off working in the banking industry. My first job was a phone rep, and 8 years later I was assistant vice president and banking officer for several Fortune 500 banks. So hard work is definitely a real thing. The American dream is definitely a real thing. Shortly after my wife and I decided, she was also in the banking industry as a manager, we decided to go start a business on our own. So we started a real estate investment operation. We also have an insurance catastrophe adjusting company, and that's what kind of makes our money, if you want to look at it this way. But my passion has always been teaching. I was a high school teacher during the past year. While we operated the businesses, I've also taught college in the evening. So I have a little bit of a diverse background, and I think what uniquely prepared me for this role. Naturally, when we look out into our community, we see first responders. We see those who are protecting us overseas, and we see those who are teaching our children. I understand each one of those situations personally and individually. So I think it makes me very, very unique in this regard. But right now, I'd like to just tell you all that I'm very excited to be here. Amongst all of the forums that we've had throughout the past few months, this was the one that I was looking forward to the most, and I can't wait to have your questions. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Pam Keith. It is my desire to represent you in Washington, D.C. So let me tell you a little bit about me. I am the daughter of a United States diplomat. Prior to serving the government as a diplomat, my father was a naval officer. That's how he paid for his education. I was actually born in Istanbul, Turkey. And I lived for the first 7 years of my life as the child of a diplomatic household. Our job, our role, was to project American values and interests overseas. And even though I didn't know a lot about the United States coming up, because I didn't live here, I knew that it stood for opportunity, justice, and equality and democracy. It was a gift to have a government that was chosen by the people to serve the people. Over the years, I've had an opportunity to know my country more by knowing other countries more, because you appreciate the United States so much more when you have something to compare it to. I went to college and high school in California, then I went to Boston College Law School, and shortly thereafter, I followed my father's footsteps into the United States Navy. I became a judge advocate. If you've heard of that phrase, did you ever see that movie, A Few Good Men? That was me. I did that, and it was fabulous. I started defending sailors and Marines who got themselves into trouble, especially those who were written off as losers who would never amount to anything. And I was able to stand up for them and make a case, not just a point, a case for them. I then went to big law firms because I had a bunch of law school loans to pay off. And I went to big law firms like Morgan Lewis and Jones Day. I represented Fortune 500 companies. They paid a lot of money for me to think through their problems, find solutions, find win-win solutions. A labor attorney has to build relationships over a period of time. It's not just about winning at all costs. You have to be creative, you have to be thoughtful, and you have to be really willing to stay in a fight, because sometimes that's what collective bargaining was. I was recruited to South Florida by Florida Power and Light. Raise your hand if you know that company. I was senior counsel for them. And that's what brought me to South Florida. But I learned early in my life that to whom much is given, much is required. I have gotten in the ring to fight for sailors and Marines. I have gotten in the ring to fight for corporations and to find solutions. And now I choose to get in the ring to fight for the people of this district. Because too often we feel Like our voices are not heard, our desires are not reflected in the legislation. Somehow we vote, but the legislation seems to reflect only the interests of the few. And so sometimes it's about making sure you're reaching across the aisle, and sometimes it's about making sure you've got a winner in the ring for you. That is why I'm running for office, and that's why I look forward to this amazing conversation.
Thanks so much, John. Thank you, Rabbi, for having us here. Shavua Tov to everyone. For those of you who know the significance of the number 18 in Jewish mysticism, I would say it bodes well for this evening. We are having a Congressional District 18 Forum on the 18th of August, so it is a double high kind of evening for us tonight. My name is Lauren Baer. I'm running to represent our community in Congress. This is the community where I was raised, where I went to local public schools, where I was called to the Torah as bat mitzvah, where my grandparents founded the Jewish Federation of South Palm Beach County, and where 4 generations of my family have gotten to know their community and made ends meet by selling furniture for a living. I started my own career as a lawyer, taking the fight to get money out of politics all the way up to the Supreme Court, and I spent 6 years then serving as an official in the Obama administration, senior advisor to both of his secretaries of state and the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations. I worked hard to keep our country safe, to project American values, to combat anti-Semitism in the United States and abroad. But let me tell you this, I never saw a case in a courtroom or a crisis in the Situation Room where there was as much on the line for our country as there is this year. I believe that the people of this district deserve a representative who votes in our interests, not in special interests, and who works hard in Washington to make government work for each and every one of us. I'm running for Congress because I don't think we can call our economy fair when the stock market is booming, but everyday working folks are sometimes working 2 or 3 jobs and they can't make ends meet. I'm running for Congress because I don't think we can say we're protecting the sick when Congress is voting to strip health care from millions of Americans, and Medicare and Social Security are on the chopping block just to give a tax cut to the most fortunate among us. I'm running for Congress because I don't think we can say we're protecting our environment when our lake is 90% covered with toxic algae and we have a climate change denialist at the head of the EPA. I am running for Congress because I want to see a foreign policy that's conducted sensibly, not on Twitter. And I'm running for Congress because I think we can't say we value the lives of each and every one of our children when we're allowing them to be gunned down in schools and community centers and places of worship. I learned from my 6 years serving the American people that our government can actually work if we send the right kind of people to Washington. And I look forward to earning your trust, to working with you up to November and beyond, to making our Congress finally work again for you. Thank you.
All right, as I go through this pile of great questions here, what I'm going to do, again, we'll give each candidate a minute or so to answer each question from you, the audience. And the first question I want to ask, the biggest issue facing District 18 today, as we sit here, what do you feel is the biggest issue facing our district? We'll start with you, Mr. Freeman.
Biggest issue in 18 and across Florida is the environment. There's no question about it. I think all of you probably agree with me. We need clean water. We need clean waterways. We need clean air. Florida depends on it. It's not just our fishermen. It's not just our tourist industry. It's everyone is affected psychologically by contamination in our waterways. So we must have a solution. I've studied it ad nauseum, this issue. I've studied it extensively. I'm a scientist. I can tell you that it is a very complex issue. It has no easy solution at present. I do not want to give you false hope tonight, but I do believe in technology, that technology may solve our problem, and there are several promising technologies to solve the blue-green algae problem. But leave that there, and to say only that for Florida, we need clean water, we need clean waterways, we need clean air. That is the future of Florida. Thank you.
And Mr. Freeman, Mr. Thomas.
I would mirror Mr. Freeman to a degree. I do think we need to address the water issue. One of the big bullet points on my platform is exactly that. Presently, I'm the only candidate on either side who actually has an actionable plan. With my insurance catastrophe adjusting business, we show up to events like this all around the country, BP oil spill, Flint, Michigan crisis, these types of things. And so I absolutely have a plan for this problem. But that's not the number one problem. That's a big one. But I can tell you one of the biggest problems is what we see every single day, which is the question mark that's in everyone's head about their health care, about the quality of life, and about education. I am a very strong proponent of America First policies, and the reason why, and I just was at an event recognizing Alzheimer's and aging Americans, and what makes me very sad is when we have billions of dollars going overseas, and we have billions of dollars being spent on people who are not even supposed to be here, while we have our seniors not able to get medical care. This is absolutely unacceptable, and I'm going to change that.
I think we need to understand the foundational problem. Everything that we like about our rules, our laws, our policy, or things that we don't like are only changed through the vote. Our biggest threat to our country is the dismantling of the rule of law and good governance. We have an administration that is completely run amok and that is welcoming enemies into our election system. We have a government that is we have a Congress that is no longer interested in serving as a check on the government. And unfortunately, that is a big problem.
You can disagree, but let's allow each candidate.
I'm sorry.
Here.
You asked what I sincerely believe, and I believe that is the greatest threat that is facing Florida, that is the greatest threat that's facing our United States of America, is that we have to get our heads around the fact that we have lost control of the governance if we allow it to go completely amok as we have seen it go.
Thank you, Mr.
I'm going to say it. I went to these four candidates and said, you will behave civilly or I will not invite you. They all agreed. And the point of tonight was that it was going to be different. If you do not agree, that is your prerogative. But listen, and we will not have outbursts like that. It is disrespectful, and this night tonight is going to be based on respect and disagreement. And if you cannot do that, folks, I'm sorry, I will have to ask you, please, to leave. We want to see. I know there's a lot of people with a lot of different feelings here. This is the country that we have created. But if we can't even listen to each other and not become whatever you want to call it, then what have we become? So please, we do not have to agree on everything. We will not. But respect is the one thing that we can claim. And in a synagogue, we will insist on it. Thank you.
I believe that the single largest issue directly affecting our community is healthcare. And that's particularly true for residents of St. Lucie County. 1 in every 3 adults in St. Lucie County has no health insurance. That means 1 in every 3 adults in this county is one accident, one illness away from economic devastation, or a terrible choice to take care of themselves at the risk of their economic livelihood. Those of us who do have insurance are dealing with the issue of spiraling costs, too few choices, and decreased quality of care. And we have a Congress that has approached this issue instead of in a sensible, responsible way by attempting to sabotage and undermine the Affordable Care Act. I believe that healthcare is a fundamental human right, and in the wealthiest country in the world, that no individual should be able to force to choose between having food on the table and having the basic kind of care that they need. I will firmly commit to each and every one of you today that one of my top priorities will be taking steps to ensure that each and every American has access to health insurance, quality, affordable health care. Because if we don't have our health, if we don't have our basic needs met, we cannot live the full and meaningful lives that each of us deserve to live from birth through old age.
As I went through the question forms, the number one topic that did come up was the algae situation, which I'm sure you've seen plenty of in the news. I'm going to try to condense about 7 or 8 questions, and I will ask each of the candidates, and Mr. Freeman had started talking about this, the plan. Is there a plan in place, a plan that you may have to correct the algae problem in the short term, and perhaps how can this go away in the long term? So I'll ask Ms. Bear if you'll start on this. Your plans on the toxic algae situation.
Sure, happy to start on this. And I'll start out by pointing out that we know that this isn't just an environmental crisis. It's a health crisis for our community, and it's an economic crisis for our community, given the number of people who make their living off of the water and off of tourism. This is affecting each and every one of us. Now, what bothers me about the current approach is that we seem to only be talking about the algae crisis when there is a crisis. We're talking about how to clean up a mess instead of how to prevent that mess in the first place. I do have a plan that starts by limiting the amount of nutrients that can go into Lake Okeechobee, because we know there's a simple recipe for an algae bloom. It's nitrogen plus phosphorus plus water plus heat. So we need to start by limiting the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that can go in both from the south, from Big Sugar, and from the north through the Kissimmee River. Now beyond that, we need to make sure that Congress is implementing CERP, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan, and that goes far beyond just building the EAA reservoir south of the lake. There are more than 20 different projects in that plan, and that plan has been around for 20 years. It's long overdue for Congress not only to approve those plans, but to properly fund them so that we can restore the proper flow of water south. We also need to deal with the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule, which right now does not allow the Army Corps of Engineers to consider things like human health in determining when they discharge water from the lake into our river. These are all steps that we can take to ensure that we're not dealing with this crisis year over year over year. And the last thing that I'll mention is we need to be taking meaningful climate change action. We're seeing algae blooms this year not only in Florida, but in 13 other locations around the United States and in many locations around the world. And the reason is because our globe is becoming hotter. Unless we take the steps right now to ward off climate change, to move towards a clean energy future, we're going to continue to see environmental and economic devastation in the state that all of us love so much.
This issue is actually very simple. It's the land, stupid. That's what we need, the land south of the lake. Now, while it is true that we care about discharges when those discharges contain algae, the discharges are harmful to our river and our estuary no matter what, no matter when. Because even if the water was crystal clear Poland Springs water, discharging clean water, fresh water into salt water rivers destroys the environment. We pay attention when there's algae, but it's destructive all the time. And that is the bigger problem. The system is designed to control water for the purpose of irrigating sugar fields, not for the purpose of feeding the Everglades, not for the purpose of maintaining our lagoons, our beaches, and our rivers. So what we did is put the interests of Big Sugar above the interests of everything else in Florida, including tourism, including human health, including our economy. Sugar got put number one, and everything else got put behind it. And that is why we are where we are. Amendment 1 was designed to get control of the land south of the lake for the purpose of moving water slowly south into the Everglades where it belongs. For some reason, despite the fact that the people of Florida voted for it, the legislature and the governor's house decided not to implement our will. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. In Florida, we vote for stuff, and if the legislature doesn't like it, they just choose not to do it. It's wild. That's crazy. We decided we wanted the land south of the lake for the purpose of moving water from Lake Okeechobee into the Everglades. That was a decision of the people of the state of Florida. That land does not belong to Big Sugar. It belongs to the people of the state of Florida. They lease it from us. We give it, and we can take it away. That's what we need. Leadership willing to do what it takes, because we'll never have good options when Mother Nature's rains flow. We will never have good options. The only options we will have is to continue to blow up our estuaries and our rivers with water, be it crystal clear water or water that's as disgusting as you could possibly imagine. It's destructive no matter what. And unless and until we own that, we're going to continue to have this problem. We will not control the rain. Not today, not tomorrow, and not next week. We will not have better options until we give ourselves one by taking the land south of the lake.
So I'm a Florida native, and I grew up here on the Treasure Coast, so that makes me about as rare as a purple unicorn. So I know this problem like the back of my hand. It's not climate change. 30 years ago when I was in high school, it was still having algae blooms, and this is 30 years ago. It's not Big Sugar. We have to demystify this thing. It's big citrus, it's big strawberries, it's big agriculture. So how do we fix this problem? As you probably know, if you've been here for some years, Lake Okeechobee is kind of sitting right in the middle, right? And what used to happen is the Kissimmee River, the water would pass down and would go into Lake Okeechobee, and then when the high rains would come, it would overflow and it would just move south towards the Everglades. So what happened? Well, man stepped in because we wanted to develop more of the land south here in Florida, and so we put this big levee around it. And this was also intentional because in, I guess it was the 1923, there was this flooding actually caused mass deaths to people who lived in these areas. So they create this levee around the lake, but they didn't raise the land. They just built on it south of the lake. So it's not just as easy as saying, hey, just send it south, because guess what? Then we'd flood all of South Florida, okay? So this is when they created these channels. C-44 Canal is the one that we focus on here. So how do we fix this problem? Well, first of all, we have to have a temporary solution, and it's got to be an actionable plan that we can do right now. We can't wait. By the way, there is water, the Southern Reservoir Plan buying water, or the land south, it's already in the works, but it's just going to take 8 to 10 years to happen. Okay, so what do you do for 8 to 10 years? That's the question. So what is the temporary solution until the Southern Reservoir is built? So first thing, when we show up to an oil spill or some of these environmental catastrophes, we employ something called geotubes. Now these things are a high-grade, low-cost, fabric type of filtration system that can be rolled out in days. They stretch from maybe here to the back of the room, and you literally filter the water right through it. So you just allow the water to pass through. It catches, I'd like to say 100%, but I want to be an honest politician. Catches about 90% of the contaminants in these geotubes. And then after the geotubes are full of the contaminant, guess what? You just pick them up and you ship them out, and you can actually resell what's inside back to the agricultural industry or to anyone else as phosphorus. biofuel is another option. So these geotubes can be set up at the mouth of the C-44 canal before the water passes into our estuary. Another little piece of misinformation: clean water going into our estuary does not kill it. In fact, long before there were any issues with algae, our rivers, our clean water rivers, did go into our estuary. What happens in our estuary is this is where the clean water blends into where the salt water meets, and this is called brackish water. And in these areas, you have the nutrients from the clean water that meets the brackish water, and this is where it's a great place for our fish to lay eggs. It's a great place for our dolphins to come up into our estuary. This is why they come up there, because this is a historic thing that's been happening for thousands of years, right? So what we're essentially doing with the geotubes is we're just recreating the natural filtration system that used to exist before this problem came about. So that's kind of our quick temporary solution to solve this problem, which can be employed in a matter of days. Now, long-term solution, what we ought to do is right at the mouth of the C-44, where we're catching this runoff, this toxic runoff, we can go ahead and create a water treatment facility right there at the mouth. It would have to be pretty substantial because we're pumping out 1.6 billion gallons every time we do a release, so it's a lot. So it would have to tie in, this long-term plan would have to tie in with our southern reservoir. And between those two things, we could actually solve the problem. And the water would move south in a controlled manner. It would restore the other blade. So this is a great plan. It's an actionable plan. I talk about it in detail on my YouTube page. Or if you go to davecummings.org, scroll down, right in the center, you'll see my full platform, and it's in there, and it talks about this in a little more detail. Okay. And last but not least, I almost forgot stage 3. We have to go back at stage 3 and dredge this soil. This stuff has been embedded deep in our soil, and it's killed our seagrass, and if it kills the seagrass, then the fish have no place to lay the eggs. Manatees don't have anything to eat, and it has an ecological chain reaction. So we need to go back and dredge this soil to clean it as well. So that's the plan. Take a look at it on my page there, davecummings.org. All right, thank you.
All right, look, there's been a lot of things said here. Let me set the record straight. The vast majority of the pollution is coming from the north. The Okeechobee is a wastebasket for the water coming down the Kissimmee Basin. And the cattle manure coming from just north of the lake. There is pollution coming from the south of the lake, no question about it. Furthermore, there is a sediment at the bottom of the lake filled with nitrogen and phosphorus that is in equilibrium with the water, which means that even if you stopped any more pollution going into the lake now, there would still be a problem. Because when you work that sediment with heat, from the sun, which we have plenty of here in Florida, you're going to have blue-green algae. And there are plans in place. We know that we have C-44 going on, we have C-43 going on, we have the reservoir south of the lake, we have treatment centers to clean the water and send it south. We're working on the Tamiami Trail. The Tamiami Trail is very important. It was blocking the flow of nature south to the Florida Bay. Having said all that, there is a problem of time. The plans that are in place, including the plans for the dike, are years and years away, folks. Now, I alluded before to technology. I think we can solve the problem of technology. Since this has been put on the table tonight, I'll tell you this, that I think at the mouth of C-44 and the mouth of C-43, we could work ultrasonic along with vacuuming the algae in tandem with slower, more gradual discharges by the Army Corps of Engineers. I think there's a solution there. It needs to be looked at. It needs to be put on the table. Because if you clean the water before you send it east and west, you've solved the problem. And I'm not saying that you know, this is nirvana, that this is paradise, that this is going to work. I'm putting it on the table. It needs to be looked at. But before we send this water to the Caloosahatchee and into the St. Lucie estuary, I think we can clean it and send clean water east and west. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Freeman. We have a lot of questions to get to, and you know, I hate to be the bad guy. I'm going to sort of start jumping in at about the 90-second mark, just so I'll alert all the candidates here, because we have a ton of questions to get to, and I know these are all difficult to answer in 90 seconds because we're looking at a lot of big picture things here. But please do what you can so we can get a lot of the questions in from our audience. Okay, the next question I'm going to ask, again, it's kind of a conglomeration of several that came in here. We're talking about health care now. Do you favor the repeal of the ACA? If not, what adjustments would you make? Or would you push for universal health care? We'll start with Ms. Beth on this.
I categorically oppose repeal of the Affordable Care Act. The Affordable Care Act extended health care to millions of Americans who were previously uninsured. It didn't go far enough in terms of making universal care, but it extended care to people who desperately need it. And what we've seen out of Congress for the last 8 years, and especially the last 2 under this administration, is a concerted effort to sabotage the ACA at the direct detriment of folks who live in our community, the health and livelihood. This mic's going in and out, so I just wanted to make sure you could hear me there. I think we need to be doing 2 things. 1, we need to be shoring up the Affordable Care Act to ensure that we're keeping health costs down and ensuring that there's choice. Thanks. See if this one works. First, 2 parts here. First, I think we need to be shoring up the Affordable Care Act. Now, the way that we can do that is through things like ensuring that individuals are informed of open enrollment periods, that we're not cutting the budgets to tell people about those, and that to ensure that we're actually funding the kind of programs that allow people to enroll in ACA programs. Now, beyond that, we need to deal with the issue that costs are high and choice is low, and we can deal with that through things like reinsurance programs that help eliminate the risk of insurers entering markets like ours that have too few health insurers in them. But we have to be moving beyond that to ensure that each and every American has coverage. And that's why I'm in support of a bill that's on the floor by Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut that would allow individuals and corporations to start to buy into Medicare and Medicaid. It's essentially a public option with proper subsidies for individuals to make sure that they can afford to buy into these programs. It will drastically increase access beyond what we have now. Because at the end of the day, healthcare is a fundamental right. And I could not, go to sleep at night as a representative of this community, knowing that I was in the wealthiest country in the world and that we were not doing enough to provide care to each and every American.
Thank you, Ms. Baird. Ms. Keith.
I think the problem with the Affordable Care Act is that for most people it still wasn't affordable. If you looked at some of the plans within those exchanges, you found plans that were like $600 a month with a $6,000 deductible. What do you have when you have a plan with a $6,000 deductible? Something you're not going to use. The bottom line is we need Medicare for all. We need a system that ensures that every American has insurance from birth to death and every chapter in between. So the thing is, we started out wrong back in the 1940s when we allowed employers to provide health insurance in lieu of higher wages. But then it became healthcare was just only for the employed. And then we had healthcare for the poor, we called it Medicaid, and healthcare for seniors, we called it Medicare, then the VA for veterans. It was a patchwork quilt of healthcare with a big old donut hole in the middle for everybody that didn't fit one of those categories. It is the singular, most unintelligent approach to healthcare you could possibly have. Every employer out there is now a healthcare insurance company unto themselves. They have to have open enrollment and benefits and claims and all of this. That's every employer. Then we have Medicaid, 50 different states, 50 administrations. Then we have CHIP, 50 different states, 50 administrations, and then Medicaid separate and the VA separate. We don't multiply administrative cost. We quadrillionize administrative costs. It is the singularly most duplicative, most inefficient way to help health insurance in our country. And with all of that baked in cost, we still have 33 million people who are uninsured. That is singularly the worst thing we can do. And unfortunately, we have a bunch of politicians out there who say that the best thing we can do is incrementally fix this. No, it's way past time for baby steps. We need giant leaps in the direction of what is morally sound and fiscally responsible. And that's why I support Medicare for all.
Thank you, Ms. Steve.
You know, when you look at the state of our healthcare right now, it's pretty bad, and we can all agree why. So let's go back. Yeah. Let's go back and let's take a look. Christmas Eve. Every single Democrat representative voted for ACA. Not one single Republican. I'm not going to blame a party, and I'm not going to blame presidents or anything, because you've come here to hear my plan, right? You haven't come here to hear me bash parties or plans, right? But it's important to note in this particular incident, when you don't bring all parties to the table, you're creating a catastrophe. Let's just be honest. So what did we end up with? We had this Affordable Care Act, which ended up not being affordable, and you couldn't pick your own doctor, and there were several other problems that rolled out with this. And now here we are, trying to fix not only the problems that came from it, but the $21 trillion debt that followed. This is not the richest country in the world necessarily when you start looking at debt like this. Maybe it still is, but we need to start approaching things differently. So here's what I like to look at. When I look at where the problem began, I say, let's go back to X. When we go back to X and we say, was there anything wrong with X to begin with? And I think the answer is pretty clear. There was only a few things wrong with our healthcare system before. We had the greatest healthcare system in the world. We had most people covered, but there was just a few people in the segment of the population that were not. So what do? Do we strip down the entire healthcare system and make the government operate it? Have you ever seen the government do well at anything? I'm being honest. Some things, right? But if we look at this, are you going to really commit your health, your life, your family to government bureaucrats? Not a good idea. So let's go back to X. When we look at X, we have private health insurance, which covered most Americans. Most Americans. We did have the VA, which covered our veterans, and they have specific needs. That's why. We had Medicare and we had Medicaid for our poor and for our elderly. But there was a gap. So what do? We go back to X, and then what we do is we say, let's identify that gap. People who may have pre-existing conditions. We change that one part of the law. People who may have come to the table with special needs. We change that one part of the law. This is what we should have done, and this is probably what would be the best option at this point, is to go revisit where we started, and instead of tearing down the entire thing, we go back to X, we identify the few segments of the population that were left out, and we include them. It's really not that hard. That's
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Mr. Freeman.
Okay, folks, absolutely, healthcare is the right of every American citizen, from when you're born to when you die. There's no question in my mind that that's the way it should be. And let me tell you, to a large extent, we do take care of our people. When people say they're uninsured, they don't get left in the street when they're in a car accident, I can tell you folks. People get taken to the hospital, and if the insurance companies don't pay for it, it gets picked up by the medical system itself. I think you're all aware of that. The medical system itself, the doctors and the hospitals and the whole cascade of services, picks up the tab. So we do have coverage in our country. Is our system right? No, it's not right. We need a system, and I can tell you that from decades of experience in doing this, we need a system that aligns the interest of the doctor with the interest of the patient. When you do that, you get cost-effective medicine. By cost-effective, I mean you get the right diagnosis, which leads to the right treatment, which is good for the patient, right? And it's good for the system, because you don't have any waste in the system with screwing around with the wrong diagnosis. Now there's a choice coming up. I see it coming, and that is that we have a lot of technology in the pipeline. It's very expensive. You got a lot of pharmacology technology. You got a lot of device technology. Now these companies make a lot of dollars off this technology, but at the end of the day, I think we need to shortcut all the technology, because really what we really want to save our dollars up for, save our effort for, is to provide medical services to every single American. And let me assure you that the present day level of technology, the sophistication thereof, is incredible. So I do not worry about the technology of tomorrow, etc. I worry about people today. And that we can afford to take care of our people today if we curb the technology of tomorrow. Because every American deserves the level of technology that we have today.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Okay. Respect, folks, please, please. All right. The next question, we are in a synagogue, and so I'm going to merge another few questions asking about Israel. It's 25 years just about since the first Oslo Accord. So the question I will ask all the candidates, as I again merge a couple of questions here, what role should the U.S. play in the Mideast peace process? Is there a two-state solution that can be salvaged? Mr. Freeman, I'll ask you first.
Is there a two-state solution? Absolutely not. The sovereignty of Israel is sacred. The West Bank is part of Israel as far as I'm concerned. Everything west of the Jordan, per God's law and His word, that is Israel. Is there a role for a compromise here? I'm not going to beat around the bush. I don't think so. They hate us. The Palestinians, the Sunni Muslims there, they're not going to relent. Their leaders are not going to let them relent. Are there compromises so we can live together? Well, that's been going on for decades, folks. People learn to live with each other because they don't want to be fighting all the time. They want some life for their children, some life for themselves. Is there a solution to this problem? Absolutely not. Let's be blunt. God gave that land to Israel. As a Christian, I tell you, I believe this with all my heart. God gave that land to Israel. He took Abraham from the land of Ur and sent him to the promised land. And he said, I give this land to you. And I set my covenant with you. So the West Bank is Israel, and ever shall be. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question?
Is there a 25 years since the Oslo Accord anniversary? The question, can a two-state solution be salvaged? What role should the U.S. play in the Mideast peace process?
So a couple factors that come in here. The first is this. How many of you remember something called the 6-Day War? That's right. So what area and occupied territories did Israel take? Who said that? All of it, right? So I think it's really important to look and say, all right, well, whether we acknowledge that the land was given by God, which I believe as well, or whether the land was taken in a military offensive, that land is Israel's. And this is the way I view it. Now, how do we approach this situation where we don't have bloodshed, combat, warfare? Well, this is something where the United States, I think, needs to be, as our current president has been, a very strong supporter of Israel. I think that we can come to the table, we can try to talk and have conversations, but I would almost agree with Mr. Freeman that when you have one side that raises their children to hate the United States, when you have one side that raises their children to hate Israel, I mean, I've watched the television shows in my travels. They actually have Mickey Mouse type characters talking about killing Jews running on Palestinian television. This is the truth. This is not a rose-colored world. This is what they're calling for. When you have rockets being rained down on Israel, not from Israel there, rockets coming on Israel from Palestine, is it not the right of Israel to defend themselves? Is it not the right of Israel to make an incursion to stop these things or to do the roof knock type bombs as a response? Who's even seen what I'm talking about, a roof knock bomb? This is where Israel drops a dummy round on a roof where rockets are coming from. 3 to 5 minutes later, this is to allow any civilians in that building the opportunity to leave. Then the building gets leveled with the second one. Who's ever seen someone that does warfare with such integrity? And yet we have people pushing for BDS against Israel for human rights violations. How about the people who launched rockets on Israel? How about the people who are beheading people like Daniel Pearl and Americans who are over there like as a U.S. soldier like I am, who go over and not are just a friend to Israel, but a defender of Israel? So I don't think there can be a two-state solution as long as we have one side that has one objective, and that's to wipe Israel off the face of the earth. So what does Israel need? Israel doesn't just need a friend. Israel needs a defender, and when I get to Congress, that is exactly what I will be.
I think that when it comes to deciding what Israel is going to look like, what the Palestinian territory is going to look like, the role of the United States is not simply to come in and say it's going to be our way. Because that's not diplomacy. Israel, a country that I took the time to visit myself, and I learned something. It ain't weak. It actually has a mind of its own. It has economic interests of its own. It has an ability to defend itself. It does not need, nor does it want, the United States to come in and tell it what it's going to do. But the same is true for the Palestinian lands and the Palestinian people. They have a mind of their own. It is their job to negotiate in good faith a resolution to the situation. I do believe in a two-state solution. Why? Because I think that the Middle East should have a Jewish identity state. That is what Israel is. It's a Jewish identity state. If it's a one-state solution, what you mean is one of two things is going to go down. Either you're going to have a country that is entirely of Jewish citizens and a whole bunch of people who can't vote on land or have any identity whatsoever, which is not a solution that I would ever countenance personally. I think that would be morally strange. Or a country that over time loses its Jewish identity because the Palestinian people's numbers will increase over time. That's the question. What happens if every Palestinian becomes a Jewish citizen, an Israeli citizen? It loses its Jewish identity. That's what people are legitimately concerned with. I do think there is a way to resolve this diplomatically, but unfortunately, I also believe that we have leadership both in the United States and in Israel that is moving in the wrong direction. God knows the leadership of the Palestinians has always been moving in the wrong direction. I don't even know that you could tell me who exactly is the leadership of the Palestinians. Is it Fatah? Is it Hamas? Is it Hezbollah? I mean, we don't know. because they don't actually interact all that well with each other. So it's very difficult to engage in good faith negotiations when you don't even know which partner you're negotiating with. So the question is, are we in a situation right now where we can have good faith negotiations? No, I think right now we can't have good faith negotiations. Not from what I'm seeing. But does that mean that I'm willing to give up on the notion forever? No. Because I think you can always move in a different direction. New leadership in the United States, new leadership in Israel, and new leadership of the Palestinian people will come at some point. And when it does, it's going to be time to get back to that bargaining table and negotiate in the interests of everybody.
Thank you, Ms.
Because that's the safety of the Israeli state going forward.
This is an issue that's incredibly, deeply personal to me. First time I went to Israel, I was 11 years old. I visited the preschool in Kfar Saba that's named after my grandparents. I went and prayed at the Western Wall, climbed to the top of Masada. I visited Yom HaShoah to commemorate the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust. And I understood, even at that young age, that Israel was two things. First, Israel was a necessary homeland for the Jewish people, a necessary safe haven for people who had suffered persecution over thousands of years. But I learned more than that. Israel wasn't just a safe haven for the Jewish people. Israel was a shining example of democracy in the Middle East, the only democracy in the Middle East. And I was taught by my grandparents and I was taught by my rabbis that it was important to preserve both. One, Israel as a Jewish state, and two, Israel as a democratic state. And that in order to do that, the only way that we could do that was through a two-state solution. A solution that maintained Israel as a Jewish democratic homeland and also provided for a demilitarized Palestinian state as well. Now, the peace process has hit a bumpy road over the past 25 years. But I will say that I hold out hope. And in this process, I believe the United States has a role to play, and that role to play is as an honest broker. Because when the parties are willing and ready to negotiate, and this requires not just leadership in Israel and in Palestine, but the people as well, at such point, the United States can be a facilitator of a peace process, the way we were in Oslo. And I believe that we still can move towards a two-state solution. And that if we don't hold that out, that hope, we give up on the promise of Israel as a Jewish democracy. And that's not a hope I am personally willing to give up on.
Thank you, Ms. Bear. All right, our next question from the audience. In the wake of the president's tax cuts, the national debt continues to soar. Do you still find that to be a big issue? And if so, how do we contain the national debt? Ms. Bear, I'll let you begin with that.
My grandfather was a Republican. He was a Republican because it was the party of fiscal responsibility and strong national security. After the Republican tax plan was passed, I imagined my grandfather rolling over in his grave. That tax plan increased our national deficit by $1.5 trillion. And it did that in order to give massive tax cuts to two interest groups. One, corporations. Two, the ultra-wealthy. That's me. And the individuals who are going to have to pay for this are our children and our grandchildren. And now what we see is Medicare and Social Security on the chopping block in order to pay for those tax cuts. Now, I believe we do need tax reform in this country. We need tax reform for the people who genuinely need it. The working class, in the middle class. We need tax reform that's going to put dollars in the pockets of individuals who are going to spend that money and inject it back into our economy. And we need to roll back taxes that disproportionately affect only the most fortunate among us, to the detriment of the overwhelming majority of Americans who are just trying hard to make ends meet. I fundamentally believe that we can have a fair and equitable tax plan, and we can do it while being fiscally responsible. And that's what I'll plan to fight for when I'm in Congress.
Thank you, Ms. Baird.
There are 50,712 reasons why the GOP tax cut was stupid, but let me start with this most important one, the one that's going to affect so many people in this room, and that's the Social Security Trust Fund. How Social Security Trust Fund works is that you worked all this time and you put cash into the trust fund. Uncle Sam took that cash and it spent it on other stuff, and it wrote back to the trust fund this thing called an IOU. We call it a treasury bond. And over time, that treasury bond had a maturation date, at which point Uncle Sam would have to make good on that IOU. Guess what? A whole bunch of those treasury bonds are coming due. And the cash that we were supposed to use to pay that IOU off just got taken off the table by the Republic. That's what they did. They took the revenue out of our system to pay back those IOUs. So the only answer now is to say, yeah, I guess I owe you less now. I'm going to pay you back less. I'm going to make you work longer and get fewer benefits, get less cost of living increases, get less. Because I spent your cash and I decided not to make good on that IOU. Now, I don't know about you, but that's damn wrong in my book. And so let's get honest. We never could afford that tax cut. We had obligations. We had responsibilities. We had bills to pay. And the people who got over were not the people who were struggling or having a hard time. It's the person who feels that the Maserati was getting lonely without the Ferrari next to it. That is a morally bankrupt way to legislate, and I will never co-sign on something like that. We owe our seniors the right to retire in dignity. They got into the system, they paid what they were supposed to pay, and we now have to live up to those obligations. So I will go to Congress to repeal those tax cuts.
Thank you, Mr. Baird.
I didn't know I was super wealthy. It makes me feel pretty good.
Do you have a Maserati and a Ferrari?
Do we have any other super wealthy people in here? A few? A handful? Good. Okay, so it seems like that tax cut did good for regular folks. So I'm glad that it did well for me. Let's talk about economics. Let's talk about economics for just a minute. I'm a guy that started out as a young man with single parent. My father passed away when I was younger. I grew up with no money. And now I'm a guy that hires people for a living, right? So how did I get from here to there? It's called the American Dream. What is the American Dream? American Dream in a lot of ways is economics. So let's talk about economics for a second. We've only been in office right now, this current president, for 1 year. Where did the debt come from over the past almost decade? That's the first question we have to ask ourselves, honestly. Then the second question we have to ask ourselves is, what is the plan? And then we'll ask ourselves, will it work? So what is the plan? The plan is simple. If we can reduce the tax burden, which was the highest in the world on our businesses. It was. It was over 35%. The highest in the world, and guess what? That caused all of these companies to go where? Offshore. Thank you so much. Overseas. So what have we done? We've lowered the tax bracket for corporations. This way they'll come back to the United States. Secondly, thank you very much. Secondly, after we lowered the tax bracket for corporations in the United States, guess what we started to do? We also started to increase tariffs on these other companies on some of their imports for the imbalances that we have. That's right. So if you understand economics, this is what's happening. We're bringing the jobs back to the United States. and the income is coming with it. You say, I don't believe you. I'll prove it to you. Look at our GDP right now. For the first time in decades, we're at 4.1%. You can't deny it. You can't deny it. And guess what else? The trend is this. And the debt trend is this. Yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is.
All right.
Go look at the independent numbers. Listen. Go look at the independent numbers. I'm only speaking from the truth. So, excuse me.
All right, guys,
Show respect.
let him finish up.
I don't think anyone who's on my side was shouting down your people except when they were attacking the president. So let's get back to basics. In 1 year, we've seen our debt go down and we've seen our GDP grow in 1 year. That's a good trend. I can't wait to have this conversation a year from now and then another year from then. And I think we'll see, and I honestly in my heart believe this is the right approach. Because when you give companies more money back in their pocket, guess what they want to do in the United States? They want to expand. And as they expand their operations, guess what they do? They hire more employees. Sir, I'm a business owner. Excuse me, I'm a business owner. I'm speaking from experience.
All right.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so that's what we do.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. Shh, let everyone have their turn. Thank
My
you.
esteemed colleagues, audience, I cannot believe that socialism is the way forward for America. Now, if we want our people to have jobs, somebody has to employ them.
That's right.
That's business. Some businessman, small, medium-sized, or large, has to employ these people. And right now, unemployment is at all-time lows, folks. It is. These are just facts. Mr. Trump has produced a good economy. Minorities, their unemployment rates are at all-time lows. And it wasn't just the tax cut. I really think the tax cut was only a small part of what Mr. Trump has produced. If you look at the regulatory, he has repealed, I believe, 26 regulatory rules and regs for every one new one coming online. He has unfettered our economy. It was dying of lack of oxygen.
Respect, please.
Yes. So the regulatory that he has repealed and set aside has helped business enormously. Now, as far as the debt, which is a problem, it's no question. If you look back at what John Kennedy did a long, long time ago, and what Ronald Reagan did in the 80s, they cut taxes, and government revenues did increase. And that worked, folks. That did work. So I believe that we also have another piece here in terms of debt control, and that is what we call the swamp. And you guys have heard a lot about the swamp. And there's a lot of corruption in Washington. A lot of waste. An enormous amount. So we need to curb that. And I think it can be done, and that would be my job as a congressman. I am an honest person, no BS person. I go straight forward. I'll tell you if something is a non-starter, I'll tell you if it's a good idea. And we need to clean up the swamp. There's no question about it.
Thank you, Mr. Freeman. All right. We're actually starting to run out of time, and I want all the candidates to have closing arguments, or closing statements. Let me get to one more question here. Mr. Cummings, we'll start with you on this. What should the federal government do about states legalizing marijuana and other drugs?
Great question. The first thing is I'm okay with medical marijuana as long as it's prescribed by a doctor. I think this is, we've seen lots of evidence that there are folks who have opioid issues, pain issues, and several other issues that can be addressed in this way. And in fact, the good news is recently a judge did legalize this. So this is kind of covers this base for us. So I think that's a very positive thing. So the next question is, are we going to stop there? Are we going to look at decriminalization, legalization, which are kind of two different things there slightly. And then this is a question where we have to ask ourselves, does the rights of one person, could they potentially infringe on another? And it's a very important question. For instance, you're out at a restaurant, and or not a restaurant, let's say just out and about, and someone is smoking their Mary Jane, and as they're blowing the stuff out, guess what? Well, you're sitting right next to them. So that could potentially infringe on your rights, right? So,
Thank you.
I'll wait till you're quiet.
Please, folks, thank you.
I think the rabbi talked about respect, and I expect that. So when you're done, let me know. Thank you. So, we have to look very carefully and cautiously about how we're going to address this. Colorado is probably something that we could look at as a model if that's the direction we want to go. But I think overwhelmingly what we're looking at right now, the general population is kind of on the fence on this thing. We have some folks that really want it and some folks that really do not want it. And so before we take a step into that direction, I think we need to look at other states who have implemented it and see if it's been properly implemented. And if we don't want it, I think there are plenty of reasons why we can come up with that as well. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Cummings.
I'm for decriminalization of marijuana, period. And here's why. There's a couple reasons. First of all, there's never been an intellectually sound reason for marijuana to be illegal. If the rule is we don't want things that intoxicate, then alcohol should be illegal. If the rule is we don't want things that are bad for you, then cigarettes should be illegal. The bottom line is it's a live and let live kind of country. Now, we know that marijuana and cannabis has positive effects for a lot of people. But explain to me why it is more morally sound to get blotto on Jack Daniels than it is to get hot weed. There's no reason there. The reason cannabis is illegal is because well-paid lobbyists worked really hard in the 1950s to make sure that cannabis would not compete with alcohol. That's why. And oh, by the way, it was a way to keep black people and hippies in jail. That's why. So, I say decriminalize cannabis now. And not only that, because I'm a fiscally sound entrepreneurial kind of chick, I say let's turn Florida into the weed capital of the world. We have a year-long growing season here. We got nothing but trouble. And I would much rather grow cannabis than sugar. And because it's a higher cash yield per acre. I'm like, let's make sense here, people. We know that cannabis helps people stay off of opioids. We know that it can help people with epileptic seizures. We know that it can help people who are going through chemotherapy. But it also just helps people deal with their irritating spouse. It also helps people deal with traffic. I am not a weed user. And to my dear friend, I will say this. If you can't smoke a pipe in a restaurant, then I don't know why you'd worry about people smoking weed in a restaurant. You can't smoke in a restaurant, period. Just eat it. You can have your cookies or brownies or whatever. The bottom line is cannabis legalization makes economic and moral sense.
Thank you, Mr. Ms. Beth.
All right, let's look at the facts here. More than 60% of Americans right now believe in decriminalization of marijuana. And they believe in decriminalization of marijuana not only for medical purposes, but for recreational use as well. Now, we know the reasons why it's good for medical purposes, because it helps people with chronic pain, with chronic illness. It's an alternative to the opioids that have devastated our community in Florida in particular. Now, when it comes to using marijuana for recreational purposes, there are other benefits that can accrue here. First of all, economic. This is a growth industry potentially for our state. Beyond that, health and safety. If individuals are consuming drugs, having them be purchased in a way where they're regulated and certain standards occur is a safety issue that impacts our community. But we also need to look at the criminal justice implications of this. There are legitimate safety and security issues in our country. And when we have law enforcement that is dealing with limited resources, if we decriminalize marijuana, that allows reallocation of those resources towards prosecuting the most violent and dangerous crimes, instead of people who are recreational marijuana users. And by the way, those resources that have been devoted towards prosecuting recreational marijuana users have resulted in a criminal justice system that disproportionately jails people of color. So at the end of the day, there are sound economic reasons for decriminalization, there are sound health reasons for decriminalization, and it's something that the majority of the country at this point in 2018 agrees with.
Be careful what you wish for. Look, how did we get to this opioid crisis that's ruined a part of an entire generation? I can tell you how. The doctors, exactly, the doctors. The drug companies, the opioid drug companies, convinced the doctors that opioids were not addictive and weren't going to destroy anybody's life. Now, I got a good friend of mine whose 2 kids have both been destroyed by opioids. And I can tell you this from experience, I know how opioids work. The older people, and I'm talking about the Medicare crowd that I take care of, they can handle it. It doesn't seem to do anything. They take opioids, and it's fine. But when you start giving opioids to young people, teens in their 20s, into their early 30s, it devastates them. Some of them, their characters are not formed, and they become dependent very quickly on the opioids. Now, as far as medical marijuana, let me tell you a story. My wife has been suffering from a chronic pain syndrome for at least 2 decades. And she took opioids, but they didn't agree with her. She took milder opioids, tramadol, and that helped her some, but she was always in pain. A burning, searing, neuropathic pain that basically ruined her life. Now, she is on medical marijuana, and it has been a miracle for her. She takes it along with the tramadol, and the 2 together have changed her life. Now she's a happy person. So, I guess I have nothing to do with it either. So, yeah, absolutely medical marijuana, absolutely. It has incredible potential for the future. And absolutely, it's a great thing, folks. Fantastic thing. So I'll leave you with that.
All right, everyone has been very patient, and we really only scratched the surface in this past hour and 20 minutes, hour and a half, but we wanted to give each candidate a last chance to make a closing remarks. We'll give each one about 3 minutes. Ms. Bear, if we can start with you, please.
First of all, I want to start again by thanking the rabbi for organizing this event, for thanking all of you for coming out and joining us this evening. whatever side of the political spectrum you were on, whatever candidate you were supporting, your act of being here tonight is an act of participation in our civic democracy. And if our democracy is going to continue to be strong, what we need to see of is more people around our community and around our country doing exactly what you're doing. Showing up, asking questions, engaging, having honest and respectful conversation. Because I don't know about you, but I feel like our political discourse has become too divisive. That there are too many people on both sides of the aisle who are interested in calling names and throwing barbs, but not interested in doing the hard work of governing. I've been all over this district, from West Palm Beach all the way up to Fort Pierce, from Stewart to Indiantown. Every day I'm talking to folks, listening to their issues. And I talk to people who are Democrats and people who are Republicans, people who are teenagers, people who are senior citizens, people who are immigrants, and people like me who were raised in this community. The interesting thing I have found in talking to all of these folks is a similarity in what people talk about wanting for their families. People say things like, I want quality, affordable health care. I want to be able to send my kids to good public schools. I want a strong economy, but I want a fair economy that works for everyone, that allows people to live the American dream. I want to see a clean environment. I want to see our Florida waterways pristine. I want to know that I can send my kids off to school and be sure that they're going to come home alive. And I want to see America retain its place of global leadership. These are nonpartisan desires. And what that means is that we need to send someone to Washington who has the experience and the temperament to bring folks together, both across the aisle and frankly from within different factions within one's own party, and build the kind of consensus that's going to help get Congress legislating to deliver solutions for the American people. I come to you as one of you, as someone who has deep, deep ties in this district, as someone whose family has been here for generations. I care about these issues here because these are my issues. They're the issues of my parents, of my grandparents. They're the issues of my 2-year-old daughter. I also come to you as someone with deep experience in governing, who's done the hard work of making our government actually work and deliver for the American people. And I come to you as someone who is firmly committed to always vote in your interests, not in special interests. I took a pledge at the beginning of my campaign not to take any money from corporate PACs, not to take special interest money. And I'm doing that because I think you need a representative in Washington who's genuinely going to represent each and every one of you, honestly and with integrity and with the best of intentions at heart. So I hope that I've started to earn your trust this evening. I hope to continue to earn your trust between now and November 6th. And I will promise you this, that if you elect me to represent our community in Washington next year, I will continue to work each and every day to earn your trust so that you can lead the kind of lives that you deserve and so that our government can deliver for this community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Beth.
I look at this room and I see people who love this country, love this community, and are willing to put their own energy, their own time, and their own effort into making it better. But it's not just in this room that I see that. In this day and age, I see an activism that just blows your mind from never again. The teenagers that are rising up and having their voices heard. The Me Too movement, women finally standing up and saying, we will not be treated like second-class citizens anymore. Black Lives Matter saying, you know what, we can hold our police officers to a higher standard of engagement with our community. To every other kind of movement that I see activism everywhere. The question is, are we looking for another Democratic leader? No. Or are we looking for a leader of Democrats? See, the thing is, the people that I see are feeling utterly disconnected from government. They're feeling so frustrated. They vote, they vote, they vote. They send somebody up to Washington, and the next thing you know, that representative is completely unresponsive to the desires of the people in their district. Here we are talking about our water. We are so frustrated. We are so angry. We want to see change. And all we see is blame and no action. We want tax laws that reflect our values. What we see is change, but not the one we're asking for. We want health care, but it's moving in the wrong direction. We want public education that's properly funded. We want our teachers to be respected. The absolute opposite is happening. What's going on, folks? What's going on? It's a disconnection. Because what happens is that people get to Washington and all of a sudden all of their time is taken up with lobbyists. All of their time is taken up with fundraising. All of their time is taken up with media appearances, and they've completely forgotten who they're answering to. Completely. People got so frustrated they were willing to vote for a businessman. Because surely that would be different than politics as usual. Truth as it is, but not the way we want it. The bottom line is this. There are people who see themselves as going up to Washington and spending all of their time with their Republican colleagues or their Democratic colleagues and figuring out how to sway them. And every once in a while, someone will stand up and say, you know what, I'm not so concerned about swaying them. How about we sway each other when we build a movement around what we want? The reason I believe in that is because I come from that kind of stock. When I look back on the right of women to vote, how did it happen? It didn't happen because a bunch of legislators decided it was okay. It happened because millions of women worked across the country. Millions of people marched. They made embroidery. They rang cowbells. They built a movement around what they wanted, and they made it happen. I come from a grandmother who was part of the civil rights movement. We didn't get civil rights legislation because a bunch of legislators thought it was a good idea. We got it because Martin Luther King inspired a whole generation to march, to fight, to stand up, to believe, and they got it done. We didn't get worker rights because a bunch of legislators said, hey, let's have overtime. It was a bunch of workers that stood and fought for what they wanted in the workplace, and they got it done because of their activism. And we have forgotten that everything good about this country comes from the activism of people just like you. That is something I will never forget. Yes, I may be a Democrat, but more than anything, I'm a believer in a governance by and for the people. It is the greatest gift our ancestors gave us. The Constitution has meaning because we breathe life into it every single day. And when you take the right of the people to vote away, when you neuter the power of the Congress, when you respect a free press, when you say that our enemies are now our friends because they fund your buildings, you have tread upon the tradition of this country. I am standing before you not asking you to vote for me because I'm a Democrat. I'm asking you to vote for me because I'm a leader, and I understand who I'm leading. It's not the folks up there, it's the folks right here. That's how we take our country back.
We went through our questions. We went through our questions. All the candidates are getting time now. Ma'am, later for that, ma'am. I'm sorry. Folks, we're letting the Right now, the candidates are making their closing statements. All right. All right, shh. Two more of your congressional candidates with their closing remarks. Mr. Cummings. Mr. Freeman. Okay.
I run for the United States Congress because the country needs new leadership. I pledge to you hard work. I pledge to you honesty. America must always lead the nations, and you, the people, must always lead America. Now we sit here tonight in a synagogue. I say that the crisis our country is going through resides in a spiritual realm. Will God lead us? And will we follow? Or will we try to devise our own way forward? It is the manifest destiny of America to defend Israel. And as long as America defends Israel, Israel will continue and prosper. I don't bring you any false promise about a solution in the Mideast, a two-state solution. It will not happen. But what will happen is America will continue to unite with Israel, to form a bond that is spiritual and military. And that is the salvation of the Jewish people. For you, the Jewish people are the chosen people of God. And Israel is his promised land. And Jerusalem is the apple of his eye. Those who bless the Jews will be blessed. Those who curse the Jews will be cursed. So you don't have to be in Israel. You are supporting Israel as you sit there. You are the rank and file. You are the people of Israel, even as you sit here tonight. And all of us who are strong Christians work with you. We are on your side as passionately as you are. We believe in the New Jerusalem. We believe in God's promise to the Jewish people. You cannot read the Bible any other way. And if you take God's word seriously, you understand that this entire world is focused on the Jewish people. He created the Jewish people to lead all nations. And he created America to defend Israel. And I will repeat, it is the manifest destiny of America to defend Israel. And I say, God bless Israel. Thank you.
Shh, one more.
Listen, tonight, the first thing I have to compliment you for, from the bottom of my heart, is your passion. I think that there's a lot of passion in this room. Some of it bubbled over a bit tonight. Can we agree? But ultimately, it's that passion, folks, that's going to take us from where we are to the next level. We are sitting here at a very important time in our history. We're poised to go to another era and another place, a pinnacle, which will be felt not only by us, but by our children, and by their children's children. This is a spectacular time to be an American. It's a spectacular time to enter government. Do we have challenges? You bet. Do we all have the solutions to these challenges? We may have a few, but guess what? There is not one single politician up on this stage that has all the answers. And anyone who goes up to Washington thinking they do is wrong. The only way that we're going to solve the problems that we have is to come together. There's more brain power in this one room to change America than in any one politician on this stage. Trust me on that one. What is America? Each one of us has a vision in our own mind of what this country is, what it means to us, what we embrace. For me, it's coming from nothing into being a person that can employ people. It comes from being a person who struggled through their education and worked their way up to become prosperous. That's America. But that dream has slipped away for some segments of our population. We got to get it back. We have to get it back. How do we get it back? Well, there's a lot of different ideas. But as Proverbs says, wisdom is justified by her children. You say, well, what does that mean? That ultimately, the end result is going to tell us whether it was good or bad, right? We have the benefit of history to look and see. It's kind of our crystal ball, but we look backwards to see it. We look in this crystal ball and we say, okay, wait a second, what worked and what didn't work? We have that benefit of history. But you know what else we have? As we unite as Americans, and as we unite as brothers and sisters, there is not a thing on this planet that we cannot accomplish. And as your congressman, the number one thing that I will do is unite us all and represent us all. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Closing remarks from Rabbi Linz.
We have seen several amazing things tonight. Not the least is the beginning and end of my candidacy. I have just a couple of things to say. First, I want to thank these four remarkable people. The first, in the highest sense of political discourse, lived up to their word to the dot. They talked about what they would do, not what the others won't. I owe them, as we all do, a unique debt of gratitude for the level at which this evening took place. I also found it fascinating that the candidates behaved better than the audience. I agree with John, who did a remarkable job of maintaining the Zoom. And I know, as somebody said, our emotions rolled over just a little bit. That's wonderful. You will now have a chance, if you will stay in your seats for just just a little while, so that our four combatants, our four, that's it, that was it. See, this is like Mad Libs for politics. Our candidates and their staffs can meet in the Flax Hall. There are 4 tables. Each candidate will be at a table. For those of you who did not get your questions answered, as I said at the outset, you can please feel free to approach them. Please be brief. with your questions and understand it's not limitless time. And there are other people. There is coffee there for those of you who are just a little bit under-energized. We ran out of decaf. I know. No, we didn't. Oh, no, we didn't. And I thank you all. We obviously have decisions to make, but I cannot, in my heart, thank these 4 amazing Americans for giving us the opportunity to be able to choose. Thank you.